Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul. Sorry it's been a while since I've done something that's strictly Catholic. I have quite the backlog of games that I've been wanting to cover. But I had been wanting to do this for weeks now, ever since I've been hard at work making walkthroughs for all three Zero Escape games. And I initially wanted to connect the morphogenetic field theory with the theology of God as Catholics see it, but I didn't really want to spoil the main twists and turns of the Zero Escape universe in case you wanted to play them for yourself, so I decided to use this as a simple theology lesson. So, the way that Catholics see God is slightly different from how most Protestants see it. Now, granted, there might be some Protestants out there that agree with me, but for the most part, here's what I've been told. Please forgive my webcam if this seems off to you. But the way Protestants see the nature of God, or human history as we like to call it, is here is Adam and Eve, and then we've got Noah and Abraham and the patriarchs, the prophets, Jesus' death and resurrection, and then onward into our current generation. Now that seems all fine and dandy from a human perspective, but that's just it. It's a human perspective. However, the letter Q does a much better job, at least in our limited human minds, of portraying how Catholics see the nature of God. And it all goes back to the book of Exodus, where Moses speaks to God in the burning bush, and he asks for God to reveal his name. And so God says, I am. So with that in mind, I am implies present tense, not I will be or I was, but I am, meaning ever present. So therefore, as Catholics, we believe, I guess you could also use a spider web. I'm not doing a good job of conveying it with my hands, but I'll do my best. Imagine that this here is God, and each finger is a moment in human history. Now, because each of my fingers are attached to my hand, therefore they're all sort of connected to each other. And that's how God sees the world, is in his mind, Adam and Eve are creating the fall of man, Jesus is on the cross, he's resurrected because I don't have a third hand, and our current time period. So for him, everything is in the present tense. And as a result, that's why we as Catholics believe that there's been a severe misinterpretation of the words of Jesus at the Last Supper. You see, we often think from a 21st century mind about concepts in the Bible that weren't written for a 21st century audience. The book of Revelation, for example, is the most misinterpreted book in the Bible because a lot of people forget that it was written in apocalyptic literature, which in our mind, when we think apocalypse, we think the end of the world. But that's not how John envisioned it to be. He envisioned it to be the end of the world as the Jews knew it, which for them was the destruction of the temple. So for most of the book of Revelation, he was describing the events of 73 AD, give or take, that caused no stone to be on top of each other, as Jesus prophesied. Anyway, a little bit off topic here. So, at the Last Supper, Jesus said, do this in memory of me. Now, in a 21st century mind, what comes to your mind when you hear the word remembrance or in memory? Well, if any of you are 21st century guys or girls, you're probably thinking, okay, well, if someone were to tell me to keep them in my memory, I would just, think about them, maybe have a memento or two to always keep them in mind. Just like I've probably showed you this in my very, very early videos, but I still have a picture of my grandparents, who are resting their souls right now, to remember them. But that's not what Jesus meant when he said, do this in memory of me. You see, to a Jewish audience, the word remembrance means taking that which is in the past, from a human perspective, of course, and bringing it to the present. So basically to remember God's nature. So to sort of put that into perspective, we need to go back to how the Jews celebrate the Passover. The Jews that have not accepted Jesus as the Messiah, when they do the Passover nowadays, the youngest child asks, "Why is this night different from any other night?" And the father responds something, I don't know the exact words, but it's something like, "This is the Passover that liberated our ancestors from Egypt." They're treating it as though the Passover is still happening, that God is still saving them from the angel of death to this day. So Jesus, knowing that all of us alive today obviously didn't witness his actual crucifixion, wanted us to treat it like he does, like it's an ongoing passion. So, when he said, "Do this in remembrance of me," he was not only saying that his body and blood were the real deal, but it would transport us to Calvary and allow us to re-experience the events that in our minds are in the past, but in his mind is the present. That is why when you go into a Catholic church, you see a crucifix on the wall, and maybe in Orthodox churches, but you definitely don't see a crucifix in Protestant churches. You see an empty cross, because Protestants believe, oh, well, Jesus resurrected, so why are we still worried about his passion? Well, I mean, it's good to celebrate the resurrection. We have a whole 50 days of Easter to commemorate it. But at the same time, in Jesus' mind, his passion is an ongoing process of salvation, because obviously not all of us are in heaven yet. We're not saved until after we pass through the pearly gates. Now, that might be a metaphor, but that's a common saying that means we've gone into heaven and passed the purgatorial state. So you might be wondering, well, okay, Paul, that was a nice history lesson, but how exactly does this apply to our modern times? Well, if you think about it, a lot of times we forget that God is not limited to time and space as we are. We might think that, say, a disaster happened and there's no way to fix it. But in God's mind, the events that happened before the disaster are still ever present. So we can pray for things in the past and possibly influence them. That's why we as Catholics believe that we can pray for the dead. I mean, not only is it very, very explicitly stated in the book of Maccabees, yet not all Bibles have that book. I'm not going to get into that discussion. But also because we believe that God can hear our prayers, but he doesn't see them the way that we do. We believe that when we pray, we're praying about something in the present or in the future. But to God, like I said, everything is ever present. So as far as the divine mercy is concerned, it's impossible for us to know exactly how God intends to reach out even to the worst of sinners. But what we do know is that we can't tie God's hands and say, "Oh, that person is dead. No more need for it." We can still pray for the repose of their souls, and we can still say, "God, please have mercy on them," even if they're already dead in our eyes, but alive in God's eyes. So I think I'm going to stop for here to ensure maximum memory retention. But I hope you get the idea that because God is I am, don't ever think that you're too late to pray to God or that it's too late for anything. Because with God, all things are possible. And as the song says, time is in his hands, almost literally. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And until my next one, keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye.